Good afternoon, one and all. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our webinar. We're just letting everyone in from the waiting room. So thank you for joining us again this afternoon. We'll just give it a moment for technology to allow the door to open, and then we can get stuck into things. So I hope wherever you are around the country, you're enjoying a lovely day. We've certainly got a bit of sun here in Melbourne today for a change, which is very nice. Almost slightly warmer. So, all right. Well, I have always been one to reward those who are on time. So we'll get stuck into today. So once again, thank you all for joining us. For those who don't know who I am, my name is 𝗍𝗫 𝗫𝗀𝗃. I'm one of the executive directors based in our Melbourne office. And I think we're coming on to just over 4 years that we've been putting these webinars on each month. So today I just wanted to have a little bit of a focus. There's been a lot of press around what's happening in the marketplace, what the intentions are for small business over the next 12 months. And particularly with the ATO saying that they're going to take, I think his words were decisive and swift action against SMEs, that we thought we'd talk about what some of those pressures are, what they look like, and then talk about some of the options that may be available to everyone in terms of how to deal with that. So I'll get stuck under that. Please feel free to ask any questions as we go along. I'm more than happy to be interrupted, and we can just talk through anything that's on anyone's mind at the time. That can be done either through the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just interrupt me. So we'll do our best to work through some stuff. So I'll start with something a little bit unusual for me. Is that I was in Sydney last week and happened to have one of the morning news shows on, and they were talking about how the ATO had made their position known about wanting to chase SMEs for their debt, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But the commentator that was on talking about it made a comment which really hit home to me, which said that 40% of mum and dad SMEs are currently not making money. Are currently not profitable. Now, to be honest, it's probably not that surprising when you look at a lot of the other indicators that are out there in the marketplace with the increase in costs on all fronts, as well as there's a decrease in sales volume. I think it was Creditor Watch also released some stuff last week that talked about that the average invoice value for business has dropped by about 25%, or I think it's 27%. So when you consider that there's now less money coming into a business and the increased costs of those, particularly with small businesses, it can be very difficult for them to maneuver and adjust quickly to allow for that change to occur at that sort of pace. So really hit home to me that, just 40%, I was going to be a bit dramatic there and say just under 50, but 40% of small businesses and the micro businesses, and a lot, particularly in the market that we operate in, they're currently not profitable. Now, that means that there are a lot of people that you're working with that are struggling to make ends meet, and more than likely are probably borrowing from their personal lives, or I had a client that I spoke with, I think it was last Monday, who had been running a business for 35 years. Everything had been going well. COVID was actually something that was really good to them. They'd actually been doing very well through COVID because some of those businesses just really did well. But now that they've come out the other side of that, they're finding the business has got a little bit tricky. So the accountant and they realised that they were starting to put money in, their profitability was down and sales were down. And to be honest, they were probably more focused on the sales were down rather than the end result of profitability. But they're now in a position where they're not taking their own wages. They've stopped paying themselves. and they've also looked to put some of their own money in to try and keep the business alive. Now, there are a lot of businesses out there that are starting to do that, and I'm going to talk through a couple of those things and what you can do to protect against it, or not so much protect against, but protect the clients who are making those decisions. But I think one of the interesting things when we talk about SMEs and the stress that they're under, and the fight that they're in at the moment in trying to move through this current market, is that, and again, some of you would have heard me talk about this before, but I was talking to a small group last week, and that is that most small business owners, the mum and dad type businesses that I'm talking about, they treat their business like it's another child of their family. They treat it with such reverence, and they look after it so carefully that they will do what we would consider as advisors sometimes some pretty silly things to try and keep their business alive. Now, I mentioned this morning in our webinar that if one of my two daughters was ill or sick, I would do anything, absolutely anything, to protect them. And when you consider the mindset of a director is very much in that same boat, and that they actually treat their businesses as if they're another child, some of the things that directors will do really are something that we should be trying to stop now, which is very different than if it was actually their child. And we'll talk through some of those things. And a lot of that is around money that they're putting in, the risks that they're taking, and stuff like that. So when you consider that we've got this high volume of businesses that are struggling, we've now got the ATO clearly came out through the commissioner last week, saying that they want to take even harder, more decisive and swift action against SMEs particularly. We know that in the small business market, we're in for a pretty rough trot, and that some of these guys, some of our clients, are going to have some pretty rough things to deal with. Now, when we look at it, the commissioner, and depending on what article you'll read, there's 15 different versions of what the number is that's still outstanding. But the commissioner last week, he referenced that there was 32.5 billion worth of collectible debt still out there in the small business market, and that their focus was continuing to strengthen their activity towards collection. And they specifically made a comment around there being an increased focus on superannuation, GST and 𝗵𝗴𝗵𝗁. Now, if you look beyond those words, as I have a habit of doing, when you're looking at something that they're chasing superannuation, GST and 𝗵𝗴𝗵𝗁, you can easily reference the fact that they're starting to look at using the director penalty notice regime even further. Because those three, although the director penalty notice regime can also include wet tax and luxury car tax, the predominant three areas that they really chase hard with director penalty notices is superannuation, GST and 𝗵𝗴𝗵𝗁. Now, why do they do that? Well, one of the big things obviously is that it actually allows them to make a lot of that debt personal. And the ATO aren't silly. They know that directors will do anything they can to try and keep their businesses alive, and they will let these things become personal. But what the risk is that at the moment, and I'll talk a little bit about this today, is that at the moment we've got unsecured debt, being the ATO's, particularly GST, 𝗵𝗴𝗵𝗁 and super, are unsecured debts to the business. A lot of people still believe that the ATO have a priority, which they don't. And they don't have any type of priority of any other creditor in a company. So what they're trying to do is use the laws to give themselves a priority, particularly at the personal level. They don't have the guarantees that a lot of creditors and suppliers do, but they're trying to use their law to do that. Now, they have already been ridiculously aggressive, in my opinion, but they are still a long way from what they believe to be their top levels. They're still working back to the pre-COVID levels. And what we've seen in the last couple of months is that there's been a real focus on using a lot of their extra tools to try and get money. And those include, they've had a really big push on the on reporting to the credit agencies. And the other thing that we're seeing a really big push towards at the moment is a push on the use of 𝗗𝗃cy notices. Now, for those who have been listening to me over the years, you would have heard me talk about 𝗗𝗃cy's before, but to be honest, they haven't really been used much up until the last 3 or 4 months, and they seem to really, it's almost like they found that bit of the legislation and gone a bit hard on it. Now we're seeing them 𝗗𝗃cy bank accounts, we're seeing them 𝗗𝗃cy 𝗵𝗃𝗄 facilities, and the other thing we're seeing them do is 𝗗𝗃cy debtor payments. And that's because when we're looking at trying to put payment plans in place, we're giving the ATO that information. And I'll jump around a little bit. I had a case of a client about 3 or 4 months ago who came and saw us. They weren't quite ready to make a decision to do something about the business. They thought they could fight through it, so they went down the payment plan path. When we go down the payment plan path, whether we're talking about yourselves as advisors doing it or engaging an external party who are specialists in payment plans, the ATO are looking for a whole lot of information to prove the cash viability of the business to do that. Makes perfect sense, and I understand why they do it. The problem is that when you provide a detailed list of their debtors, for instance, that show that, yes, there's all this money in the business that we can get if our debtors pay, if the ATO says no, and there's big debtors in there, they can use that information to then 𝗗𝗃cy debtors. And this client that we saw 3 or 4 months ago did exactly that. They handed in all the information to the ATO. The ATO, probably rightfully, declined the payment plan on the basis that it was a really tight cash flow, and being able to meet the payment plan that they proposed was going to be a struggle. But with the information provided, when they said no, within a week there were 𝗗𝗃cy notice issued on 3 of their biggest debtors. Now, the impact of that, I think for most of you listening, would be quite clear to understand, and that is that money that they thought that they were going to get their hands on through, because they were due to be paid at the end of the month or at the start of the month, was now no longer going to be made available to the business, because the 𝗗𝗃cy was actually for 100%. And on top of that, because the 𝗗𝗃cy notice says that they owe X amount of dollars to us, they're actually telling their main debtors how much they are in debt for. And for some people, that can be a real issue in seeing that there is an outstanding debt and how much that debt is. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about payment plans as one of the options moving forward. But if you are looking to do that for a client, please be aware to be a little bit careful and maybe black out those the debtors' names. You can still provide the detailed list of all the debtors that are owed and what their age payables or their age receivable looks like, but black out them or call them debtor 1, debtor 2, debtor 3, so that they don't have the ability to send a 𝗗𝗃cy notice out to them. The other thing that's really been of interest at the moment is that we've got a lot of clients that have been coming to us, and I'm sure you've had this conversation with clients as well, is that they've just about had enough. I was speaking before about a client that 35 years in business, had starting to, they were getting, things are getting a bit tough now. They were planning to just work through the next 2 or 3 years, build up their sales to a point that they could then put the business on the market to sell it, because they're getting close to retirement age. The problem is that the amount of money that they would need to invest to keep it alive based on the current sales and the money that they would get for the sale at the end of that was probably not going to work out in their favour. In fact, it was estimated if everything stayed the same, they would end up putting more money in than the increase in the sale price that was there. The reason why I bring that up is that because we have a lot of clients that are thinking about getting out, in what I've experienced in the last 6 months within our business is that sales of businesses are actually occurring a lot better than I actually thought they would be. We've had probably in the last 6 months, we've had 5 clients that have come to us saying that they're thinking of selling, but they're worried about whether they can beat the ATO or deal with the ATO. We didn't think that the business was sellable because it certainly didn't look that great. But all 5 of those businesses have sold or are under contract waiting to go to settlement. And in industries that I didn't think they were. 3 of them are actually been from cafes and restaurants, which I've said on our webinars before, that are some of the worst, predicted to be some of the worst industries for the next 12 to 18 months. I think 1 in 8 hospitality businesses are expected to close in the next 12 months by some reports. But those businesses are selling. So as long as many of the clients that you've got that are getting tired and are wanting to get out, there are still plenty of people who are sick of being in the workforce and are looking for businesses to buy to get out of the workforce and into business. So if you have clients at the moment that are thinking of selling and are just waiting to try and increase the profitability or increase the sales of the business before they put it on the market, I can recommend that you have another chat to them about maybe bringing that one forward. They may not get the final number that they're looking for, but there is still a lot of people out there looking to buy into businesses, and it may be an opportunity to get out a little bit earlier than what they had thought, and potentially save themselves a lot of money in trying to keep those things alive. So, but it really is quite staggering how many of these are selling. As I say, some of them I would look at and think that the only option really is to shut them down, but people are looking for things to buy. As I say, there's a lot of disgruntledness within the employment market, and some of those are willing to go into business to think that they can get a better life. And for them, with the fresh eyes and fresh mind, they may be, compared to some of these clients of ours who have probably had enough and have been fighting for too long. So just something to keep in mind, we are seeing a real trend towards that. So coming back to the ATO, we talked about the fact that they're planning to increase their activity and to try and fight a bit harder to get some of this money back. To give you an idea of where they fit at the moment, in July, there were 434 wind-up applications that were placed in the courts. Of that, 143 of those were the ATO. So that's only 32% of all wind-ups were actually initiated by the ATO. When they're in their full noise, ready to fight phase, they were up as high as 42%. So we still got quite a bit of growth, if you want to call it that. There's still quite a bit of growth in the ATO's ability to get aggressive against people. And when we look at the total insolvency pool, there's last month there was in July there was 1,184 total insolvencies. So again, the ATO is really only 1/10 of total insolvencies at the moment, and there is certainly an expectation. Now, of those insolvencies, I'm sure some of those were creditor stat demands or DPNs that drove them there, but hadn't got to that final stage of wind-up. So there's a lot of still a lot of growth available in their ability to get aggressive, and it's really mindful. It's something to be mindful of, is that there are a lot of businesses that will no doubt face this over the next 12 months. The hard part for you as advisors, and we're seeing this as well, is that those businesses that are really struggling, a lot of them are not reaching out to you. Now, there could be a couple of reasons for that, and I'm guessing at some of those reasons, but some will be is that they'll owe you money, and they don't want to ring up because they're already in trouble, and they're worried about how they're going to pay your bill. Others are just trying to hide from it all, and therefore they're not a focus. But a lot of there will be plenty of clients, unfortunately, in that small business market that are potentially on your list, that are going to see a lot of pain and heartache moving forward. Now, within all of that, one of the big things that we're starting to see is that with the ATO starting to chase, and I'll talk about the the credit reporting, because that's certainly picked up now, and that's something that's bringing people to the table. For those who don't remember, the basic rules of the credit reporting for the ATO is that you must have an ABN. You need to have debts of over $100,000, and you can't be, you aren't engaged, or the client is not engaged with the ATO in coming up with a solution. When they issue their credit default, what's happening is that although a lot of these businesses are probably not borrowing in their own right at the moment, what they are doing is that their suppliers are getting notice of the credit default. There's a lot more people now with debtor insurance. There's a lot more people who have got debtor finance in place. And as soon as you get a credit default, all of those people know. And once they know, they stop supply, which then puts significant pressure on a business as well. So it's something to be mindful of, and that's what's bringing people into both to us and to you, is that some of these external events are occurring. Now, we had a case of that relatively recently. Well, we've had a number of them, but one that I'm just going to briefly touch on. They had a credit default against them. They then had a creditor stat demand issued against the company. Now, because the creditor stat demand is mailed to the office of the registered office, which in most cases is the accountant that they're working with, the accountant then rang us and said, "Hey, you need to see this client. They've got a creditor stat demand." Now, they only have 21 days to deal with that creditor stat demand. Otherwise, they can then go to wind-up application phase. When we met with the client, we asked them to check their MyGov. When they checked their MyGov, issued at the same time were director penalty notices against the director. Now, the director hadn't received those. Because the great world of I don't have a lot of faith in Australia Post in getting mail out, and and the ATO seems to put it in the slow box compared to some of the others. So, but when our client checked their MyGov, they already had direct penalty notices issued that's only had 10 days left to go. So it's a reminder for anyone, if you're talking to clients, make sure that one of the first things you do is you get them to check their MyGov to see if there are either any outstanding director penalty notices or there are any current ones on foot, particularly if something else has happened. The ATO does appear to be doing more than one thing at a time. They used to issue a default, wait to see what happens, then they might issue a creditor stat demand, or they might issue direct penalty notices, but they seem to be doing a lot more at once at the moment. And that can both work for you and against you. As when I say for you, I'm talking for your clients, obviously. It can work for them because it brings them to the front and then you can start talking about it. But in this case, our client thought he had time to deal with stuff just because he had a CSD or a creditor stat demand. But with the director penalty notices, we were actually had less time to deal with the situation. We've now got about 7 days left. We were looking at doing a small business restructure until we realised that he had a whole bunch of director penalty Division 7A loans or directors loans that were actually going to make that impossible for us to manage. So I guess the point is that there are a lot of different factors that are starting to attack. And I know all of you listening have got a whole lot of pressures in running your own business, and you can't sit there and look at everyone's reports and everyone's details all the time. But this is, I guess, a point to highlight for you is just to look at some of these things, or if someone does come to you with one, there's a fair chance that there are a number of others either about to come or have come as well. Now, rather than just spending all of this time talking about all the negative and what's likely to happen, let's talk a few of the options that are available and what we can do to try and help people in these situations. One of the big things that seem to be happening at the moment is that there is phenomenal amounts of finance. And if a director, even outside of talking to yourselves, Googles, I've got a tax debt, what can I do? There's some really interesting things that come up. There's always, there's a whole bunch of liquidators spruiking small business restructures, saying that's the answer. And you'll also find a whole bunch of financiers offering money to pay out tax debt. You know, I want to talk about money to pay out tax debt because one of the big things that we really need to be clear on, as I mentioned before, is that ATO debt is unsecured. When a director, when you consider what I was saying before about the director treating their business like their own child, they're never going to have any issue with encumbering anything to try and keep the business alive. Now, we've got ATO debt, which is unsecured. We've got the ATO who may be trying to secure it through director penalty notices, although that's not secured either. It's given effectively giving a personal guarantee. But if the business was to borrow money to pay down the tax debt, nearly all of these lenders are looking for property security. So when the director puts up their own personal property to borrow money to pay out the ATO, they're turning an unsecured debt into a secured debt. Now, that is, for me, a really dangerous thing to do when we're talking about a business environment where we're not necessarily getting all the way through. We're just trying to limp through. Now, I've got an example of a client last year who came to us, owed about $350,000 to the ATO. They did have a DPN of 120, which they let expire as they were comfortable that the business was going to improve and they were going to be able to pay all that debt back. A couple of months after that, they chose not to go down a path of looking at something more drastic with us in a restructure. And so they ended up going and borrowing against their family home. They borrowed the $350,000 to pay out the company debt. They could have, with a restructure, only had to worry about paying out the 120. But that was something I'll come back to. So they borrowed $350,000 against their home, lent that to the business, or it was through a business loan, it was lent in and the ATO was paid out. Now, 12 months down the track, about a month later, a month ago, they came back to us and although they paid out their debt, business hadn't improved and they were slowly starting to accumulate debt again. Now, it wasn't anywhere near the level that it was before, but they were still, they could see it rising and couldn't see a way through it anymore. But now the problem that we've got in trying to help them is that we can't do anything about the secured debt. Now, these clients have realised that it's not worth being in business anymore, so we're looking at doing a controlled exit to get them out of the business and let them move on with their lives and go and get jobs. But now their mortgage is increased by $350,000, and that will need to be refinanced again with more fees and more encumbrances because that was a business loan. So it then creates further issues for our clients. So something to be really mindful of, as much as a director is adamant that they want to pay out their debt and they want to do the right thing, we need to be mindful that we're not actually creating a problem that's going to last them 20 years, not something with some more robust advice can actually mean that they don't have to pay off all of that over the next 20 years of their life. Now, we're not always going to win that argument, and directors, again, will do what they need to do or do what they want to do, but it's just something to be mindful of, that we really are, when people are looking to borrow, they're turning an unsecured debt into a secured debt, which can cause them a lot more grief moving forward. Now, securing unsecured debt is something that also happens at the payment plan level. We've seen a number of cases where, particularly companies that charge to do payment plans, not necessarily advisors themselves who are doing it, but we've seen a number of scenarios where to get a payment plan, again, directors are willing to offer anything to try and keep their business alive. So they're offering security over their home to secure a payment plan. Now, the ATO can't insist on that security, but they can ask for it, or it can be offered. Now, for me, again, what we're doing is we're turning an unsecured debt into a secured debt for a client in the hope that their business will return and survive to a number that means that they can pay it all back. If they do pay it all back, it's wonderful. And all of these things have worked out perfectly. But in an environment where time is of essence, profits are lower than they've ever been, sometimes those harder decisions, rather than putting them off in the hope that a payment plan will solve the problem, tougher decisions may need to be made earlier, but you change the dynamic if you've actually given away all this security, which we're seeing happen more and more at the moment. So please be mindful if you're involved in putting together a payment plan for a client, that if the payment plan requires security, I personally think you need to reconsider whether that's offered, and you look at what other options there are. Because restructuring a business through a pre-pack or using the SBR model or using a VA and deed company arrangement does not create security over the unsecured debts. So it still leaves them as an unsecured debt and gives your client an opportunity to survive without putting them further at risk and putting further things, putting further their personal assets at stake. So that's a couple of things to be mindful of, particularly around the using finance and using payment plans. Now, we'll talk about if you are looking to use finance, or the director is looking to use finance to pay down some tax debt. Generally, what happens is that they finance against their personal home, or they borrow from external sources, and that money is lent to the company to pay the debt. If that is the case, please ensure that PPSR security is put in place, that a general security agreement and an 𝗀𝗶𝗵 is put in place for the director or whoever's lent the money to give them priority. Because again, if you do lend that money, if the directors are putting money in, whether it be in small chunks or in big chunks, if they're putting money into the business, they're acting as a bank. If they're acting as a bank, they have the right to take that security. If they come back and then you do need a firm like us, or you put them straight to liquidation, and we'll talk about that as well. If you come to us, having a security in place changes the dynamic of how we can look after them, because they have a right to get some of their money back before other creditors. If they just put money in to try and keep things alive, then they have, and without security, they're an unsecured creditor like everyone else, and they're actually treated worse than most other unsecured creditors. But if you give them the power of the security, then it gives them the power to actually have some control over how things manage out. So it's really important to do that. If you don't have local lawyers that know how to do it, please reach out and talk to us. We don't do it. We don't actually do the documentation ourselves, but we can point you in the right direction of people who understand it and know how to do it to make sure it's set up right. And we can give some advice around what should be looked at and what should be done for that. But it is a really powerful tool, and it's something that can work to great advantage for clients in the future if things don't improve the way they hope they are going to improve. So they're just a couple of things to keep in mind when we're talking about using finance and using payment plans, and particularly the link to securitizing stuff that's unsecured. Again, once you move beyond those payment plans or financing debt out, then we move into the normal areas that we speak about all the time. SBRs are a very popular, the new shiny toy at the moment in the insolvency industry. We're seeing upwards of across the country, there's upwards of about 170 to 180 of them being done per month. Now they're getting some very good results. Probably around 20 to 30% on average is the settlement amount that seems to be being accepted. and probably about 70% on average of those are getting up. What we are finding, though, that the 70% that are getting up, the 30 that aren't, is probably because that wasn't actually the right thing for them to go into. It's the new shiny toy that everyone's going to because it seems like it's the easiest, less invasive way of going. But if it's not the right tool, it's still not going to work for a client. So it's important to get that initial advice to look at whether an SBR is the right tool, because if it's not, what you've done by going into it and then coming out of it, although the director still has control of the business, you flag to everyone that you're potentially insolvent or that you are insolvent, and then that will increase a lot of attacks afterwards when the director's got the business back. So you're then forced into some moves fairly quickly after that. So get the pre-advice, have a chat to us, and we can make sure that it is the right thing to do. I still believe that a pre-pack restructure can be a very good tool and can be a very good way of moving forward and giving the business a second chance. The other thing we're seeing a lot of, and I've spoken about this in the past, is people have just had enough and are deciding to get out, and controlling that exit out of the business the right way, particularly when you've got loan accounts in play from the directors. You've got super outstanding, you've got all these different things, just shutting the door the next day and appointing a liquidator without doing the pre-work can end up being quite ugly. There was a bit of a spat of it about 12 months ago where directors were going straight to liquidators and they were appointing. We're now getting a lot of inquiry about people needing help to deal with liquidators for insolvent trading claims, for claims against their loan accounts, and we're now helping a number of people having various fights with liquidators where they appointed without doing any of that pre-work. As I said earlier, there seems to be, and I'm not in the business sale world. I'm not a business sale people. I do speak to some, but we are seeing quite a lot of these small and micro businesses are actually being sold and changing hands. We're talking businesses that have got, maybe being sold for $100,000 to $200,000. Ones that I would not think that were sellable. And we would be looking towards a plan of a controlled exit for them. These clients had come to us saying, no, I want to sell it. It's a great business, all the rest of it. It's a great business with a great tax debt, so the profitability was always questionable. But when they put it on the market, people are willing to buy. And as I said before, I think we've got a wave of business owners that are trying to get out of business because they've had enough. But there are a whole lot of employees that are trying to come into the market. They've had enough of being on their own. They've had enough of being an employee. They're looking to do something different. They're disgruntled with being in the employment world. Some of them have actually got cashed up through COVID, and they're now looking for a way to change their life and go into business for themselves. So marrying those two markets together and giving us a chance to let some of these who want to get out and some of those who want to get in, there is a true opportunity to do that. The problem often is that the sale price is not high enough to deal with all the debt that the business has. And that's where a controlled exit and then a liquidation on the backside of the sale is often a really good option. Most business owners think they're going to be able to sell it to pay out all their debt. I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing that they're able to get a sum of money and then they can work with us to come up with a solution to deal with the rest of the debt. But it is meaning that things like landlords, various leases on the equipment and various things like that can be dealt with in the sale. So you've got less personal exposure that you need to address moving forward. So there are plenty of options for people. The sooner, and again, this is an old message, I know, and some of you are probably rolling your eyes, but the sooner you get to talk to them and we can look at those options for them, whether it be a payment plan the right way, whether it be financed the right way, whether it be restructures or controlled exits or sales, All of those options are available, but they're available if you have time. If we've got DPNs that are expiring in 10 days, like I spoke about with the client before, there's not that many options, and you don't have the way forward or the way out. That puts directors under enormous pressure to make some decisions that, as I say, in some cases can be quite silly and quite damaging to them long term. So identifying these clearly the people that are going to be attacked in the next 12 months by the ATO or others. Normally if they owe the ATO, there's plenty of other creditors out there who are getting aggressive as well. And that's the problem. We're all waiting for a debtor to pay a bill. That debt is running late. Those businesses are falling over. As the insolvency rates go higher, more businesses are going to struggle because they're all being affected by a business that now can't pay them. So that pretty much covered the things that I wanted to cover. I don't want people to think that I'm all doom and gloom and thinking that the world's going to end. But I do want to make sure that I highlight that I think particularly the unsecured to secured, I think is a problem that we need to be really well aware of as advisors, because we're starting to see the impact of that coming through on some clients now, and then we're going to see more of it as unfortunately, in some cases, predatory lending to meet the needs of a director who's more worried about saving their business baby than they are about looking at what's smart for them the long term. Now, I will open up the floor if anyone's got any questions or comments or things that they've seen of late that they would like to raise. While people are formulating questions, hopefully. One thing I will say is that as much as I love everyone's support online with our webinars every month, I do want to highlight that next month you'll see the start of our seminar series in person in different parts around the country. I think pretty much from the start of September through to mid to late October. We've got seminars in different parts of the country. We've now put the link up. Most of you should have received invites now, but with the way the email system works, a lot of that gets lost in junk. So you'll see in the chat box that Stella's put up the link to our website, which has got all the seminars around the country. For those in Melbourne, they actually start in 2 weeks. So between Hank and I, it'd be lovely to see everyone come and join us for either breakfast or lunch, and come and see us in person and have a chat, rather than having to listen to me on a screen. I know some people it's more convenient, but hopefully, as I say, you can put the UGG boots away and come and join us in person. It'd be great. So please have a look at that. Otherwise, just give me a buzz or any of the team a buzz and they can give you the dates of what's coming up. Outside that, there doesn't seem to be a lot of questions, so I'll put the poll has been put up there. There is an extra question there, so rather than just ticking the one box, have a look. There might, we're certainly keen on understanding what you're getting out of these and what insights you're having. So please take a little bit of time for that. And I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to cover. So it's certainly interesting times in our small business market. I know some of you aren't all in the small business market, you're in much bigger markets than that. But I do think the mum and dad business market is going to be a really interesting place to be over the next 6 to 12 months. So there are a lot of options for people, and we can protect and save a lot of them from a lot of heartache. But it's important that we talk early to be able to do that. I will, for those, I think if you've got nothing else and I've got no other comments, you're more than welcome to leave at this point. I will stay online for another couple of minutes in case anyone's got some questions and they're a little bit gun shy in front of doing it in front of the whole group. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure, and I always feel honoured that people give up their time to listen to myself and my thoughts and my comments on what's happening in the marketplace. and what we think that we can do to help. So please feel free to pick up the phone at any time and have a chat to us. Really keen to be there to help where we can. But apart from that, have a great afternoon. I hope to see some of you in person over the next couple of months. And otherwise, we'll see you next month online. So thank you. Those who do need to go, obviously, thank you very much. Otherwise, I'll stay on for some other questions. Now, I do have a direct question here. Do you have up to 20 days to clear outstanding super if you appoint an SBR practitioner? So the question was, in case I mumbled while I read that, do you have up to 20 days to clear outstanding super if you appoint an SBRP practitioner? My understanding is yes, you do. So by the time the SBR practitioner writes the report to go to the creditors, all super must be paid, is my understanding. It doesn't have to be paid on the day of appointment. That will actually be something that each practitioner may have a slightly different view on. I hope that answers the question. I won't mention the name who's written it because that's a direct question, so I wasn't sure if that was a private question or just how you've written it. But yeah, you do have 20 days to pay, which is up until the date the report's written, is my understanding of how the rules work for that. Thank you, Frida, for your thank you. I'm glad you have enjoyed it. There doesn't appear to be anything else jumping out. So thank you all again for joining us. It looks like we've got people coming from all parts of the country. We've got everyone. I've got people from Cairns all the way down here to Victoria. I think I saw someone from Perth as well. Well, it's a more reasonable hour now in Perth. Another question I've got here: does the practitioner have to notify all unsecured creditors, or can they just say the OTO and work cover be notified only? No, all creditors need to be notified if there are outstanding unsecured creditors. It can't just work that you pick the ones that you want to tell and ignore the rest. It would be nice if you could do that, but it probably defeats the purpose of because the other side of that is that all creditors, whether they accept it or not, if it's voted up and it is accepted as the offer is accepted, then all creditors are bound by that acceptance. So it's important that all creditors are notified. You can't quite get away with just telling a few. It would be I could see that being quite advantageous if we could. All right, I'll given it takes a little bit of time to write a question, I'll give it another sec or two in case anyone has anything else. You are welcome just to unmute yourself and talk as well. You don't have to hold on to writing. But if there's nothing else, I think we'll close out today. Again, thank you. Really appreciate everyone coming along. As I say, it's a real honour that you give up some of your time to listen to us. So have a great day. Reach out if you need to, and hopefully we'll see you in person. Otherwise, I'll be back here next month. All right. Thanks, everyone.